Recently, I got a chance to watch the HBO film Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops, and it had a profound impact on me. It's really made me think about how we train police officers to respond to mental health calls. So, on today's episode of the Tactical In-Service Podcast, I talk with former San Antonio police officer, best-selling author, and the Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops, Ernie Stevens, right now.
The movie Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops, it's funny how it started, to be honest with you. I have to take you back a little bit in time and kind of paint the picture for you. This started back in 2003 when I was assigned to the gang unit in San Antonio. And it was my day off, and I got volunteered because I was off to go to this a class called CIT training. We had never heard of it. I didn't know what it was, but I worked nights, so if you went to training during the day, you got to go home at night for a week and sleep in your own bed and have a weekend off, right? So I got back to work the following day, and I was told by my supervisor that I would be attending class next week. And I said, that's fine. What is it? And he said, well, it's called Crisis Intervention Training. I'm like, well, it sounds sexy, but what's it about? And he said, well, it's about interacting with people that are in a mental health crisis and de-escalation. I'm like, take me out. Like, that's not for me. I don't want to go. And he said, well, it's already been approved by accounting, so too bad, so sad you're going. And it was one of those, oh my God, I cannot believe I got signed up for this, but you know what? I'm just going to make the best of it. And it was just like I thought, Eric. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, PowerPoints, subject matter experts, doctors coming in, talking about mental health. And although I'm learning, because really my entire information that I knew about mental health growing up was whatever I saw on television. But this was not a topic I was interested about. We had role plays in the afternoon, which I did not like doing. And it was on Thursday, kind of where things began to change. On Thursday, a lady by the name of Janine Owens came in as a representative for NAMI, which is your National Alliance for Mental Illness. It's a community support system with advocacy for mental health. And she's she was an elderly lady. I got to be careful now because I'm getting older, but in her upper 60s, early 70s, talking about her son that had mental illness. And she began to tell her story about her son, Jeffrey, who, if she had to call the police, there was a good chance that he would want to fight them and attack them. He did not like police, politics, or preachers, was her three things that she mentioned. And she started to describe what it was like for her to live inside of his illness. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not fair. Like, she should be enjoying retirement. But then she continued her story. And she said, one day one of you officers will have to respond to my house because I have no other options but to call 911 when I'm scared. And I try not to call. But there are occasions where I have to call. And you might show up and shoot, and who knows, maybe even kill my son. But I want you to know something, that if that happens, it's okay. Because you have a family that I want you to go home safe to. And you'll never know what it's like to live inside of a home with somebody that's got a mental illness. So that one hit me kind of hard. I waited for the class to be over, and I approached her, and I said, Janine, why would you say that to a group of officers? I'm confused by this. And she said, well, it's true. And besides, what are you going to do? Are you going to change the way things are? And that was the aha moment I need, Eric. It was one of those, because there's power in story, right?
Yeah.
So, within the last day and a half, I gave it everything I could to turn my attitude around and have a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset. And on Monday morning, I joined NAMI. I went out and joined the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and really, it changed my entire career path. I was advocating to the chief's office to start a mental health unit. I asked for all the training equipment and manuals that Houston brought down to train us, if I could take that over as a train the trainer, and began teaching the rest of the San Antonio Police Department this course, and just, change it based on resources that were available here. And I got the okay to start the training, but it was getting that unit going that was difficult. It took years and years to get the unit going. And after we finally got going, it was 2008, 5 years later, after advocating and finally getting the National Alliance on Mental Illness to come to the table and petition the chief's office, we got started. And when that happened, we started getting a little local exposure. And before you knew it, we had Nightline with Byron Pitts come down and do a ride-along. And in that particular year, I believe it was 2017, there were several incidences across the United States where police officers had used force, deadly force, against people in a mental health crisis that they either were not armed at all or had some type of weapon, like in the opening of the video, and I won't spoil it if you've not seen it yet, but somebody that was holding a screwdriver in their hand, right? So that story got back to the filmmaker, Jen McShane, who then reached out to us, myself and Joe, and said, hey, I'm a filmmaker from New York, and I would like to come down and do a ride-along with you. She had read an article in The Atlantic written by Ann Snyder called Policing with Velvet Gloves, and she had come down and did a ride-along with us. I said, yeah, there's something different about these guys in San Antonio. For us, we're just doing our job. But she comes down and she shows up with no film crew, just an iPhone following us around. And I'm like, what is going on here? What kind of movie is this supposed to be? But what I did not know was she is brilliant. She's had multiple documentaries. She's an award-winning film director. And once we did our very first call, she knew. She said, you know what, there's a story here. This is different. We don't police like that in New York. In fact, the New York Police Department and the New York Fire Department hate each other. So it's hard enough for them to get along with the community. They fight within each other. So she came back and started filming in right at the end of 2016, and the film debuted in 2019 at South by Southwest and won the festival. And after that, it was just film festivals, one after another, and it just kept winning and winning, and until we were nominated for a few Emmys, and then it won an Emmy as well.
Yeah. For those that don't know, it's on HBO, right? That's where they can watch the movie.
That's correct, yeah. HBO, and you can do the free trial. I think it lasts for 7 days and then cancel. Yep. That's what I did.
Yeah. I was telling you, I had access to it because I had to watch Hard Knocks because my team, the Lions, were on there. But all that excitement is now.
You admit that.
Gone.
You admit to that, Eric. Oh my God.
It's been a lifelong thing. I just can't. I don't know. So going back, you go to this training. You see a very powerful story. It's a game changer for you. How difficult was it to get this unit started? You mentioned that you had some battles, but I mean, how difficult was it to sell it to, because law enforcement, it's like one of those things. This is the way we've always done it. How were you able to overcome that?
Yeah. So a couple of things, right? Law enforcement is very antiquated in their approach to policing and to the training that they introduce within law enforcement. Also, in law enforcement, much like the military, you're really only allowed to be as smart as your rank. So if the idea doesn't belong to a chief or a deputy chief, it's really not a good idea until it becomes their idea. So right. It was difficult. And then once we had buy-in from the chief, he was approached at a legislative breakfast where I happened to be present, and he kind of got pressured to come up to the stage and give a few words. And then one of the questions was, hey, Chief McManus, have you thought about starting a mental health unit? He's like, well, absolutely I have. In fact, Officer Stevens is over there, and he's going to be the first one on this new unit. So it was difficult. It was difficult from a leadership standpoint. It was difficult from a culture standpoint within law enforcement, because for so long, the attitude within law enforcement is, we don't handle civil issues. We only handle criminal issues. Well, in Texas, when you do an involuntary commitment, that is a civil issue. So that's actually not true when you hear officers say that, because we do it all the time. It's just we're not very proficient at it because we weren't adequately trained in how to do so. So this training, it had been around since the late 80s from Memphis, Tennessee. It just really didn't become popular until the late 90s, early 2000s, where departments were like, yeah, I guess we don't know everything there is to know about mental health, and maybe it's time that we expand our knowledge on this.
All right. What is your approach? How is that different than the typical law enforcement? Patrol comes out, they don't have any of this training, they respond, someone's in a mental health crisis. How is your approach different than what a traditional response would be?
Yeah, well, first of all, knowledge is power, right? So now I understood better what I was responding to. And as a patrol officer, I would come in and always just look for the problem. Like, what's the problem? How do I fix it? In crisis intervention training, you look at the person, not the problem, and you say, how do I make a connection instead of how do I make a correction? I think that's very important for your listeners to understand, because that is true empathy. That is true rapport building and connection. And in order to do so, Eric, you have to be able to be vulnerable yourself and authentic yourself, and be able to be, share your own self and your own life stories in order to make that connection, with somebody, to show them, hey, it's okay not to be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way, right? So that was the approach. I think that was the biggest takeaway I learned from crisis intervention training. And it took a lot of growing up. I'll be honest with you. Prior to 2003, if you called me to your house for a mental health crisis, I would have done you a disservice. I would have either looked for a reason to arrest you or just put basically a Band-Aid on a bullet hole and moved on, right, the best I could. And that did nothing for the member of the community, right? In fact, I probably caused more harm than I did help. So it took a lot of maturing on my part. And the biggest barrier to this entire journey was myself, right? I had to get past my own stigmas in order to be proficient at, becoming a mental health officer over the years.
Yeah. Do you have any specific success stories in your time working with the unit where you can point to it and say, I know that I would have had a different response had I not been through this training, had I not been on this unit, where things could have turned out in a bad, but because of your approach and your training, it was a positive outcome?
Well, I would say almost every encounter I had after the training was a game changer, because in law enforcement, much like the military, it's ask, tell, make, right? I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to tell you to do it. And then if I have to, I'm going to make you do it. Where, this concept really, it's listen, explain with equity and dignity. It's a different approach. It's a slower approach. It's approach based on connection and understanding. You're not rushed. Like there's, it's man, that's such a good question, because you really have to look at each situation in and of itself as unique, because each situation really truly is based on trauma, right? It's somebody's trauma, and everybody's trauma is unique. So in my mind, I know that when an officer a paramedic, when they go to a call, they put rubber gloves on, right? Because they assume that everybody they're going to come in contact with could have a communicable disease. Well, in my mind, when I respond to a mental health call, I'm assuming that everybody I come in contact with has some type of unprocessed trauma, and this crisis that they're in right now could have been a triggering event from that trauma. So I kind of have to glove up my brain in order to think that way when I respond. I know that's a weird analogy, but it's an easy way for me to explain it in order for hopefully officers that may listen to this to say, oh, that's a different approach that I didn't think about taking before.
Right. No, I think that is pretty good. Like, even when I'm doing training in the legal aspect, when we're doing use of force training, like every scenario with role players you go into, someone's got a knife, and we show up and we're screaming, drop the knife, drop the knife, drop the knife. And then we see these horrible videos throughout the country where an officer responds and it's someone's having a mental health crisis. They have a knife or a screwdriver, maybe a gun, and we're seeing that screaming and yelling. And then the person kind of makes a move, and then there's a use of force incident. Sometimes they get killed. When we apply the law to that, and a lot of times that could be objectively reasonable. However, is that the best way to do things? And do you think this is the kind of the future of policing in this, the world we live in, the calls for police reform? The law is constantly changing. Is it just a matter of time before it starts to take some of this stuff into consideration?
Yeah, I don't think it's the future. I think it's the now. Like, if you're not already doing this, you're falling behind, because there's a huge movement for agencies to partner with local mental health authorities. We're seeing clinicians ride with officers. We're seeing community responder models built where clinicians are riding with medics and completely removing police from a lot of the low-level mental health crisis calls that come out. With the advent of 988, now the community has an alternative number to call instead of 911. So I think we are changing with the times. And police reform is not a bad word.
Right.
It's not about being a kinder, gentler department, right? It's about being a smarter department and really responding to the calls that we should adequately be responding to, that we're trained to respond to. This is why it's so important that we collaborate with our stakeholders within the community and partner with them and stop being so siloed like we have been for so long, and understand that there's a better way to approach these situations.
Right. I noticed, I'm not going to give away the movie because I want everybody to watch it. There's one scene where you respond at a courthouse, and even just tactics that you guys use where you just kind of sit and you're trying to empathize with someone and show that you're not aggressive. That's not how most patrol officers would respond to it. What do you say to some of the people out there that say, well, you're not being safe and you're not using the right tactics? How do you respond to that, and what do you do?
Well, to me, de-escalation is a tactic, right? It's not because I always have to stand in a bladed stance at a 45-degree angle with my gun sight away. I mean, okay, if that's your tactics on a good traffic stop or an interview stance, that's fine. I would do the same thing. But in dealing with somebody with a mental health crisis, I do understand that sometimes less is more, right? I'm going to be able to get somebody to relate to me and talk to me a lot better if I can get to their level and not stand over them, not talk down to them, not overpower them, but really try to relate to them and let them know, hey, I'm here for you to help me understand what you're going through, because I don't understand. Mm-hmm. This is your crisis, and I'm here just to help guide that crisis as best I can, right? So I've heard it, officers, oh, you sit down. Well, yeah, I sit down. We all do tactical compromises from time to time. If you shake hands with somebody, that's a tactical compromise, right? But knowing who my partner was and him knowing that I was always there, we always had good cover. I don't think we really ever placed ourselves in a dangerous situation. And I can tell you this, Eric, with over 12,000 involuntary commitments that I did over the 12 years I was on the mental health unit, I not once used force. So, that's a testament to the training and really, again, understanding what you're responding to. Now, I'm not going to say there weren't people that were very aggressive and psychotic and wanted to fight. It's just I wasn't ready to fight. So I said, look, we'll stay here as long as we need to. And if I need to bring a medic out and we need to use sedation medication, we'll do that. That way we don't have to use pepper spray or a taser or a baton or bullet wrap or whatever, all these things that are out there. We've got other options to help us out and keep you safe.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's incredible. 12,000 calls and no use of force incidents. That right there is amazing. Why you should be, if you're an officer watching or listening to this, you should definitely be considering this. What are some of those tactics that you use when you respond versus what the typical the officers learn at the academy? What are some of those tactics they can use?
Well, we used in San Antonio, much like many agencies, we used the foundation of the negotiator course taught by the FBI. And in that course, they have a class called active listening, right? But within active listening, there is de-escalation all the way through that, if you understand how to actively listen. Because for police officers, first responders, we love to come in and take control, right? Hey, you shut up. I'm here. I'm in control now. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Well, when you're dealing with somebody in a mental health crisis, that's not going to be the best approach. You're probably going to end up in a fight, right? Yeah. So you have to actively listen. You have to pause. You have to listen. You have to respond. You have to paraphrase. You have to repeat back certain words. You have to validate the individual, right? So there's all different ways to use communication as a way of de-escalation, but also as a way to build rapport. Distance is always your friend. Just because somebody's yelling and screaming doesn't mean that you go up there and yell and scream back, right? Think about it. Have you ever had an argument, with your wife or girlfriend, and after you all are done yelling at each other, you high-five each other and say, oh, that was great. I never knew you felt that way. Like, that never happens. Yeah. So it's learning how to, control your tone of voice, your intonations, your active listening skills really do have to be on point. And these are diminishing skills, right? So if you're not constantly practicing them, it's just like any other class that an officer would go to, they'll diminish over time if you don't practice them.
Yeah. Well, I can attest to that, because anytime that if I'm arguing with my wife over something and you yell, you need to calm down, that's never successful. But that's what a lot of the tactics are like with officers. They come yelling and screaming about stuff. So personally, I found empathy and active listening as a prosecutor to be massively important especially when I have crime victims come in, and they're just upset because they don't feel like anyone's listening to them, that they're not being heard, they don't have a choice in the matter. And I've just, with empathy and active listening, been able to get them to, get to a point where like, okay, now they're just glad because someone listened to them, and rather than trying to cut them off, they feel like now someone actually cares about this, and that's so important. You mentioned that you went to some negotiating stuff from the FBI. If there's officers that are interested in learning more about these type of tactics, what kind of resources are available? What kind of training is there out there?
Yeah, so it depends on how big your agency is, right? Your agency may have a negotiator unit, so there's a good chance that they may put on a course that you can go to. They have a basic and an advanced course along with the sheriff's department if it's a large county. If not, there'll be a regional training. The FBI also holds trainings throughout the year. You just got to get on their website to find out where those are being held. I was lucky enough that even though we had a negotiator unit on San Antonio and one on our sheriff's department, the FBI came in and I was like, I want to take theirs. And, but the concepts were the same, right? Because I'd been an instructor for years and years, but I hadn't been to the negotiator school. And so what this helped me do is really help me sharpen my skills again for another solid week, but also take in some new information based on some case studies that they had recently that we could, kind of file in the back of our mind to say, wow, if this were to happen, this is a good place to start this negotiation.
Excellent. What if you are from a smaller agency? Is there any reason why we're a small agency, we don't got the resources, we don't have the officers? Even if it was a small unit, like when I talked to our friend Todd, who's doing this in Bucks County, he mentioned that, like anyone else, they got shortages. Is there still resources out there, even if you're a small agency, to have a small unit to do stuff like this?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that even if you're a small agency, dedicate one officer to be that mental health expert, right? Send them to the courses, send them to the meetings, have them meet with the local mental health authority, find out what new resources are coming in, which ones are closing down, where your group homes are located, who your contacts are, right? For smaller agencies, I've always tried to get them to work in a regional capacity. So, hey, why don't we pull in 3 counties together? You just build a task force of an officer and a clinician that would rotate throughout these shifts, right, and account for days off. Pair yourself with your local mental health authority, and then work it like that. If as long as you're working it as a task force, and you don't have to worry about jurisdictional boundaries, right, when you're responding to these types of calls, because now you're falling under a task force which gives you regional capacity. So there's different ways to do it. If you don't have access, if the local mental health authority just cannot spare up a clinician. But I can tell you what they did in Harris County. Houston, which is a huge city, Harris County is the county which encompasses the unincorporated parts of Houston. For them to have their mental health unit, if they have their team on the east side of Harris County, to get to the west side, it's going to take like an hour and a half. So what they did was actually issued tablets to the deputies. They hired 20 clinicians to work from home. That way now you have 20 officers out there that can be handling instead of just, we need the mental health unit way over here now. Now we need them way over here. Well, sorry, they're tied up. Now you have access, 20 tablets, 20 clinicians, and they're able to reach a far bigger reach throughout the community just by using technology. I've even helped tribal nations set up memorandums of understanding, right? So they can have their local mental health authority actually come onto the reservations. They've used drones to deliver medications. I mean, it's amazing where we're at right now with the ways that people are becoming creative in how to meet the needs of the community. Yeah.
Excellent. As you were doing this, did you notice any impact on the community as far as police relationships go? Because a lot of times you're responding to areas where the only contact that this community has had with the police has always been negative. Did you see any noticeable changes in that as far as the relationship goes?
Yeah, because we were a small unit in San Antonio, word will travel. Hey, there's a mental health unit. They're plain clothes. You just have to ask for them. In the marginalized communities, I can tell you this, when I was on the gang unit, they would send us in there all the time, tell us, crack down, zero tolerance. So even though we thought we were doing a good job trying to slow down the rate of crime that was going up in those areas, we were also driving a wedge in between us and the community with the zero tolerance, right? It works for a short amount of time, but when you're there for a year and a half, the community doesn't really want to deal with you a whole lot when you're driving it through a patrol car. But when family members start hearing about, oh, there's this mental health unit, they come out in plain clothes, they bring a clinician with them, they have a medic, word will travel. So, I mean, we were able to get into even the marginalized communities where people began to know us. We would spend some time there, especially at their clinic. We would be able to take people there to the clinic if they needed an injection or a refill on their medication. So it was good. And it wasn't just inside, it just wasn't the community, Eric. It was inside the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
You know, I know that we had talked just briefly, but I want to talk to the officers and let you know that the public defender's office here in Bexar County, they did something very unique. So we have a mental health docket in Bexar County. So if you're arrested for a misdemeanor crime and you have a mental illness, you've been screened and you have a mental illness, your case could end up in that court, which you're assigned a public defender, right? So usually there's a pretrial service. So while you're waiting for your court date, you go and get your, you got to go meet with your, I wouldn't call him a probation officer. I guess your pretrial service officer would be the best way to describe him, although it seems that way. You have to take your urinalysis. You have to go get into treatment with a provider. You have to show that you're in some type of therapy or counseling, that you're taking your medications, right? So there's all these buildups before your court date. So what we were able to do was partner with the court and say, I tell you what, you've got an individual that's got 2 misdemeanor charges. If we can take them into our treatment, and I've got a provider, I've got money for medications, I've got transportation for them, I can help with permanent supportive housing, I can help with substance use treatment. If I can do all these things in X amount of time, community service, you name it, will you dismiss these cases? Prosecutor would say yes. We would come back 4 months later, 5 months later, 6 months later, and I had 100% success. Because what this shows is that people that do have a mental health diagnosis, if they are in treatment, if they have case management, they're not going to be a problem within the criminal justice system. You know, it just happened to be that they were in a crisis, a mental health crisis that landed them in a predicament where now they were in the criminal justice system. And if you know anything, right, about the population in jails or prisons, these are the #1 mental health facilities in every county, every state. So this is a front door approach initiative to try to, right, relieve the population of the jail, especially with those with mental illness, by putting them through a proper court, like a mental health court, and, you know, trying to ensure their success. And in doing so, you get people that get benefits through Social Security, through disability, food stamps, and they're able to be productive and live good lives.
Yeah. When we talked and you mentioned that kind of working with the public defender's office, I thought, wow, there's going to be some officers that, especially like in my area, we're a little bit of a smaller jurisdiction. As a prosecutor, I always thought it was immensely important. Like, yeah, maybe you're not going to want to, you know, hang out with the public defenders and you're never going to totally see eye to eye, but we always knew it was a job. We didn't take it personal, and there was things we could work together on. One of the reasons why I decided to go into this and not be a prosecutor anymore is because everyone wants to fight about everything. So for officers out there, because, you know, like in my jurisdiction, it would be like, really? You want me to help the public defender? Like, what can you say about that? Like, what has your experience been? And remember, like, what's the ultimate goal here, right?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I was on a DWI task force for years. So, I mean, you had some of the harshest defense attorneys coming after you, right? I mean,
yep.
They were coming. And the prosecutors, you know, if they did a good job, they knew when to object. They knew when to redirect. I mean, they knew it all, right? So there was always this cat and mouse game that you always had as an officer with defense attorneys. But this is different, right? Arresting somebody for drunk driving, arrest somebody for sexual assault, right? These are criminal charges that sometimes are by choice, right? Mm-hmm. Having a mental illness is not a choice. You didn't wake up one day, right, and say, I think I'll try bipolar today. That sounds fun, right? That does not happen. And then to go into a crisis and lose, control of yourself by no fault of your own, because maybe you don't have access to medication or care or treatment. And then people get scared because they see this strange behavior and call the police. Police show up. They really don't know other than, I can arrest him. they're damaging property or they're running around the street, impeding traffic or whatever the case may be. It's a lot easier to do that, right, and put them in jail. So for me, I understood that, right? I got the point when we started these jail diversion programs. I understood not only is it a cost savings, right? Because it's important that you can save money to the taxpayers. That's good,
right?
But I'm about investing into people. If we can invest into people, into human beings, and give them the opportunity for success, then we truly are doing the right thing in our communities. If it saves money to the taxpayers along the way, hey, you know what? High five, good for you. But I'm not worried about if somebody's got insurance or not when I'm trying to help them. I'm going to find them treatment and care and make sure that they get the best they can do when they're in a treatment facility. And then on the backside of that is be there on the back door for continuity of care and wraparound services to ensure that they continue to get that treatment that they need.
Yeah. Wow, this has been a ton of value. We're at that 30-minute mark where I noticed that people start looking for other YouTube videos to watch. So I want to leave on a high mark here. What kind of call to action do you have? For those that have listened, they want to know more. They want to do something about it. They want to try to bring this to their department. Where can they go? What can they do?
So if you've got an organization called NAMI in your community, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, get involved. It's not a whole lot of your time. They meet usually once a month and they talk about either new resources, maybe medications, maybe support groups that are in your area. So I would get involved there. If you have not watched the documentary, please watch the documentary on HBO. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, just Ernie Stevens. I would love to connect with you. For those smaller agencies, I actually wrote a book to help you out if you don't have access to 40 hours of training, because I know for an agency, the average department size is like 12 officers. So to give up an officer for a week can be very difficult. So if you just go to erneststevens.com, I've got a book on there that has all the foundational courses of crisis intervention training, along with the federal law that covers getting somebody treatment within a treatment facility and how they cannot refuse to treat somebody based on their ability to pay, amongst some other information that's in the book. So it's there. I tried to make it very reasonable and reachable to every single officer or first responder. And what was interesting, Eric, is when that book came out, it went #1 on Amazon. I was extremely surprised to find out who was buying it. And it wasn't just police officers or firefighters. It was teachers. It was nurses. Mm-hmm. It was single moms with kids that had mental health diagnoses. It was all different walks of life. So I'm so glad that we were able to put this kind of information out for people to read and get a hold of.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough. That's what this channel is all about. It's about educating law enforcement in a way that attorneys are not good. We give memos and stuff. So this is my attempt to get that information out there. And I can't tell you guys, if you've been listening to this, if you're watching, I'm going to leave all those links you just mentioned. If you're listening to the podcast, it'll be in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's down there. I'm going to leave those links. Click on it. I hope this, like myself, it really, watching the documentary was a game changer. I recommend everybody watch it. Get the free trial to HBO and watch it. It really opened my mind to some things that I've been doing and teaching for a long time, and I think there's a better approach. And I like the way you put it. It's not the future, it's the now. And I think that at some aspects, every police agency needs to be incorporating this. So I can't thank you enough. We'll leave all those links down there. Make sure you check it out. That's all I got for you. So thank you for your time, sir. I'm going to call it good at this point. Remind all the listeners out there, stay safe. Remember, every battle's won before it's fought. We'll see you guys all on the next episode. Thank you.